Welcome in, everyone, to another episode of Clutch Scoops, Clutch Points show here with myself, Tomer Azarly, NBA insider for Clutch Points, Brett Siegel. Brett, we're into the new year. Do you have a good holiday weekend, my friend?
It was nice, but Tomer, we're in the new year, which means we are officially in the trade season. And as we saw last night, the Trae Young trade has happened, and that was the biggest talk of the league since the calendar flipped to 2026. What was going to happen with the Hawks? What was going to happen with Trae Young? There's been the talk about Anthony Davis. There was talk of them wanting to move off a salary, and they did just that with that Trae Young trade.
Yeah, we'll jump into all the things trade related or trade rumor intel related in this call. But first, as Brett mentioned, Trae Young has been traded to the Washington Wizards. Corey Kispert and CJ McCollum headed to Atlanta in the deal. The deal, I believe, has no picks involved, Brett. And, we're seeing a Hawks team that, frankly, has just moved on from the need for Trae Young. I think they went 2-8 in the 10 games that he played. They played, they were 16-13 in the games without him. They had a positive net rating when he didn't play. They were, I think, outscored by 7 or 8 points per 100 possessions when he did play. So frankly, they needed to move on from him, and they did. What can you say about that Hawks trade and kind of the pieces involved in that?
Well, there's a lot that went into this, and the biggest discussion between the two teams was what other assets are going to be involved. Because as soon as the Wizards emerged as a potential suitor for Trae, and that became the team that Trae wanted to play for, that part of the deal was done. It was going to be a CJ for Trae swap, but the second part was getting the extra salary involved, getting that extra 6.5, $6.7 million that the Hawks needed to send out. And so was that going to be two other minimum contract type guys? Was it going to be somebody like Malachi Branham or AJ Johnson? Or would it potentially be one of these other younger guys like Corey Kispert? And that was the big discussion that the Wizards were having. They initially didn't want to give up Kispert, but they also didn't want to give up draft picks. And so the draft pick discussion became an essential part before the deal was made last night and throughout yesterday afternoon of what would the Wizards potentially give up? What would the Hawks give up? Wizards wanted the Hawks to give up a first round pick, and obviously the Hawks felt that the Washington Wizards should give up a first round pick, and so there's discussion of the Wizards potentially getting second round picks from the Hawks in addition to a first round pick going out from Washington. But those talks ultimately went nowhere. That neither side wanted to give up picks, and so the involvement of Corey Kispert is ultimately what made this deal happen. And so now we have it, Tomer. We got Corey Kispert and CJ McCollum in Atlanta. We have Trae Young being one of the faces of the Washington Wizards moving forward to carry them out of this rebuild. And so now the question becomes, well, what's going to happen with the Hawks? Will CJ McCollum be a part of another deal potentially where the Hawks send him out? Or will he stay with the Hawks? Or could he potentially become a buyout candidate once the trade deadline passes? So there's a lot of questions remaining in Atlanta, but they've certainly created a lot of flexibility for themselves over the next 4 weeks. And it seems clear that this team's focus is on the upcoming draft and building for the future.
I am curious though, despite the Trae Young is clearly an upgrade over what they had. But they do have guys like Bub Carrington. I think they drafted Trey Johnson. They have some young pieces there that I think they do want to focus on. Trae Young is owed, I believe, 95 million over the next 2 years. What is the plan with Trey in Washington? Like, why do the Wizards feel the need to make this deal as far as more than the other teams in the league?
Well, they viewed this as a buy low situation where Trey's value was certainly low in trade talks. There wasn't other teams out there creating a bidding war for him, and they knew that they could get him at a very cheap price. And so they get an extra look at him this year, and then assuming he opts into that player option next season, which all indications point towards he will, they get a full year to evaluate Trae Young with this young core. And if things don't work out, they simply don't work out, and he becomes a free agent after the 26-27 season, and there's no extension there. But right now, they're going to bring him in. They're going to see what he can do with this young group, and they view him very highly. They believe that he's the type of playmaker that can really bring out the most in some of those young guys, like you mentioned, whether it's Trey Johnson, Bub Carrington, Bilal Coulibaly, and Alex Sarr. And so that's the direction that they're going right now. That they found a veteran that is a proven star in this league. He's still only 27, 28 years old, and they're going to move forward with him as one of the faces of their franchise. But it obviously raises questions about, well, what's next for Bub Carrington? Because he's a recent first round draft pick. He's a guy that was going to be their point guard of the future, and now he's going to be a reserve guard behind Trae Young. I think that that's going to be an interesting situation to watch, but all the focus right now for Washington is on continuing to grow, retain their top 8 protected draft pick, I believe it is, from the New York Knicks, and ultimately end up with another top draftee in this year's draft.
That covers the Wizards side of things. We talked last week about the Hawks remaining interested in Anthony Davis, and the Mavs not having any interest in Trae Young, as we see that came to fruition with the Trae Young trade. But what does this mean for Anthony Davis and the Hawks? Is there still a potential path there? Are they? Is that where the Hawks are eyeing next, or what's the AD latest there with Atlanta?
Well, CJ McCollum, Luke Kennard, and Kristaps Porzingis, that's over $70 million in expiring contracts now that immediately creates options to have cap space in the summer, or the Hawks can go out and be aggressive before the trade deadline. That is what Onzi Sala in this front office is expected to do. The Hawks are going to remain buyers in this market. They're going to continue to pursue Anthony Davis. And he's the player that the Mavericks really want to move off of. Out of everybody on their roster, they're looking at potential pathways to get rid of Davis. And there's just a lot of pressure right now from Rich Paul and Clutch Sports to get AD somewhere where he can get an extension, because it does not seem like that Dallas wants to extend him. The Nico experiment failed, and so they're going to be moving in a new direction to find something that works around Kyrie Irving, Cooper Flag, and what they expect to be a top 5, top 6 draft pick with the way that their season has gone right now. So the Hawks have been clear front runners for AD. They cleared Trae off their books, and they have more expiring salaries, like we mentioned. So they got 4 weeks to figure this out, whether or not it's a deal just involving those expiring salaries of Porzingis, Kennard, and maybe you throw in that Cleveland draft pick that's going to be in the 14 to 20 region as it looks like right now. But is that enough for Anthony Davis? Is that the value that the Mavericks want? Those are questions that we're going to see answered over the next few weeks.
So, what does that mean for the Mavericks? Are they 100% willing to move off Anthony Davis? Like, I think with a guy like him, given what you gave up to get him, you shouldn't be willing to take pennies on the dollar. However, if there's pressure from the agency side to move AD somewhere where he can get an extension, you would think that these next few weeks, this next month here before the trade deadline, would be just a lot of pressure on Dallas to find a suitor for AD and get a good return back as well.
And that would be the goal. You don't want to just dump him for pennies and dimes. You want to get something of value back. And that's why those initial conversations that were held between the two teams, the Mavericks believed that they could get Zachary Risachet from the Hawks. That's what we talked about on the show last week. That's what others have reported as well, that Risachet becoming available seemed like a logical path for the Mavericks. They'd get the 2024 first overall pick. They'd get a draft pick this year and some expiring salaries. That's a deal that they would absolutely do for Anthony Davis. And there's been pushback since then from the Hawks side of things saying that they never offered Risachet. They still view him highly. It seems like it's more damage control than anything else at this point. And whether or not Risachet is available, that's one of the big question marks, Tomer, that we'll see kind of fall into place over the next 2-3 weeks leading up to the trade deadline for Anthony Davis. But they're not going to include that potential first overall pick of the Pelicans Bucks swap. That's something that's completely off limits from the Hawks perspective. They're pushing back on Risachet. So we'll see what happens here. But the market for Anthony Davis is pretty thin right now. Toronto has been mentioned, but I just don't see Toronto making a move there, because you'd have to give up Emmanuel quickly, you'd have to give up RJ Barrett, and now you're pushing forward in kind of a rebuild period where you have Scotty Barnes, Brandon Ingram, and Anthony Davis as your focal points. But the obvious reason why they would want Anthony Davis is because of all the injury concerns with Jakob Poeltl right now. They don't know when he's going to be back, and so they want to add more front court help. Anthony Davis would obviously do that in the Eastern Conference for a team that believes that they can be a top 4 seed. Some other teams that have been mentioned, the Golden State Warriors. I've talked with multiple people in the organization and in connection to the Warriors who all keep saying, why do you think that rumor's out there? And the easy answer is that the Dubs have always been interested in him. Anthony Davis is a player that would fit in perfectly with what the Warriors do if he was making $20 million. But that's the problem. He makes close to $55 million, and the Dubs simply can't trade for that contract without giving up Draymond Green or Jimmy Butler. There's zero indications that they're willing to do that right now. And so the Warriors have been looking at other avenues, which we'll get to later in this show, Tomer. One other team I do want to touch on for Anthony Davis that has been rumored is the Chicago Bulls. And while I don't expect them to push chips in and go after Anthony Davis while they're also retooling, they have assets and expiring deals to really get involved wherever that they want at this trade deadline. And one situation that I'll bring up is keep a close eye on them maybe pursuing Zion Williamson from the Pelicans. I've heard that there's been some smoke there about Chicago scouting New Orleans in recent weeks, and Zion would be the ideal buy low candidate for a team like the Bulls who have a lot of expiring contracts. So it's just something to keep an eye on. I think that there's a little bit of smoke there, and we'll see where this goes.
A lot to watch for with Anthony Davis. Before we move on, I just want to add one thing. Is Anthony looking for a max contract in this next extension or whatever contract that he gets here? Or is he willing to take something a little bit less than that?
It seems like that he wants the max, and it may be his last opportunity to get that kind of contract because he's a 32, 33-year-old big man. He's had that injury history labeled to him over the last 2 years since arriving in Dallas. And so you want to capitalize on that trade value while you can. You want to capitalize on his value to a team that he could potentially go to in the Eastern Conference where he could be the final piece to making a run to the Eastern Conference Finals or maybe even the NBA Finals. So the goal of Clutch Sports and Anthony Davis right now is to get a max extension.
We'll see if he gets it. Kyrie Irving, I know recovering from that torn ACL suffered last March, has been eyeing a return for hopefully around February, just before the All-Star break. We'll see if he's able to do that. I know that he's wanted to get back and he's been itching to get back to action. The Mavs have wanted to see Kyrie, AD, and Cooper Flag together, but it appears as though AD's time, or at least the agency side is pushing for it to see if AD can get somewhere where they will offer him that extension. We'll see when Kyrie is able to return, hopefully targeting a February return as well. Want to transition and move on to the Golden State Warriors and Jonathan Kuminga. Um, this has been talked about for months, I would say, since he signed his 2-year deal just before the start of the season. He's obviously got to wait until January 15th to be traded, and he's not a part of the rotation right now. I think the Warriors have spoken glowingly about his professionalism, despite not playing. But it just appears like his time as a Golden State Warrior, even dating back to last year, has always been numbered. And is it numbered to this next month, or is he going to stay a Warrior beyond this next month?
We've done a lot of reporting on this Tomer since last offseason, since last trade deadline, where the Warriors were sniffing around, seeing what they could get for Jonathan Kuminga at last year's trade deadline. They ultimately hold on to him. And then you had that whole fiasco with his restricted free agency, them not wanting to come back to Golden State, and the Warriors not wanting to relinquish that salary slot. He ultimately signed a 2-year deal that can reach $48.5 million if he's traded. And at this point, all signs continue to point to Kuminga being off this roster by February 5th. It's just turned into a very awkward situation where he knows he doesn't want to be there. Steve Kerr knows that he doesn't want to be there. The front office knows that Kuminga and his camp no longer want to operate with the Warriors. And so you're kind of stuck here. And the biggest thing that I can point to is the other night against the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Warriors had half their guys out because of injuries, and there was going to be a clear shot for Kuminga to play. All of a sudden, about an hour before the game, he pops up on the injury report with back soreness, and then he's ruled out. I just don't believe that it was a case that he was injured. It just seems like that he does not want to play for Steve Kerr anymore, and his representation just doesn't want his value to be diminished anymore by Steve Kerr's rotations and the minutes that he's getting. So there's been some posturing from the Dubs lately saying that they could wind up keeping him past the deadline and figure things out, but that clock's already rung, and they're ready to move on, and Kuminga doesn't want to be there. So, what kind of value can present itself for Jonathan Kuminga? That's the big question for Golden State. They have to use his salary slot to be able to get a player that can help them push for the playoffs and potentially another championship with Steph Curry right now. So, we're looking at multi-team deals with this Kuminga contract and leverage possibly other assets for someone like Trey Murphy, which is certainly a possibility if the Golden State Warriors are willing to give up multiple first round picks. The Pelicans are listening. Right now, the mood around the league is that they don't feel like the Pelicans will move off of Herb Jones or Trey Murphy. But if they get a really big offer for him, and it's something that they can't refuse, we've seen crazier things happen at the trade deadline before. But there's still a lot of teams interested in Kuminga. You got the Kings, the Chicago Bulls, the New Orleans Pelicans, as we've confirmed, still have interest on ClutchPoints. We wrote about it yesterday in our big intel piece, Tomer, that those three teams are ones to look at. There's also been mentions of the Trailblazers by Kevin O'Connor at Yahoo Sports. I believe that the Wizards were mentioned by NBC Sports Bay Area. So there's a collective group of 5, 6, 7 teams that could get in the mix here for Jonathan Kuminga. And it's just about finding somebody from the Warriors' perspective that can impact the game on both ends of the floor. Tomer is muted. Tomer does not know how to unmute his mic, everybody. That's a new one.
There you go. Kuminga, obviously a very sought after piece right now. A lot of teams believe there's star potential with him, and a lot of just untapped potential there. And I think we've seen parts of his game. I think that could lead to um, being a star or having some star potential. But again, just whatever happened for whatever reason, just hasn't worked out in Golden State despite the talent being there. Are there any maybe dark horses that maybe we're not talking about for Jonathan Kuminga? Is there a team that could swoop in at the last minute and try to, you know, up their big offer at the deadline for Kuminga?
Well, do we need to teach you how to unmute your microphone, first of all? Because I feel like that is a big issue. So we have to
Look,
address that first.
look, it's a new year, man. Stuff happens, all right, my guy.
Jonathan Kuminga's situation, Tomer, it's just very interesting because everybody knows he doesn't want to be there. And so you would think that that value goes down, but maybe just slightly it's decreased. And the reason I say that is because his contract is valuable. It's a team option next year. The team that he goes to gets a fresh look at him, and he's ready to play. He's an athletic 22, 23-year-old forward that we've seen what he can do when he has the ball in his hands and he has opportunity. And the best example I can give you is look back at that Timberwolves series last year. Once Stephen Curry went down, he was the best player for the Warriors. And so I think that speaks volumes to the type of talent that he can become. That's why there's been pushback from the Warriors through the years of not wanting to trade him because they're concerned that he could become a star somewhere else. But the Warriors, they know that this marriage is over. They need to trade him. And so what kind of player could they get back? They've looked at different center options, but that's not really a priority at this deadline. They love Quentin Post. They still like Trace Jackson Davis in certain matchups. But if they were going to add a big man, potential buy low options in a multi-team trade of Miles Turner, Bobby Portis, depending on what the Bucks do, because they could wind up going to a team that doesn't want them and wants to get off that contract. So maybe there's something that could be worked out there. But Michael Porter Jr. is also another option that they've talked about internally, but have yet to really engage in a serious matter with Brooklyn about and talk about what the trade package would look like there. The Nets don't have interest in Jonathan Kuminga, so you have to get another team or maybe even a fourth team involved. But as of right now, I don't think that a deal will be done right on January 15th when he becomes trade eligible. But the Warriors have been working the phones. They're talking with several teams over the last few weeks to see what can be done. And it just really depends on what some of these other teams do around the trade deadline to Mara. And maybe even the Clippers get involved. Maybe he ends up in LA with you and he becomes a focal point for the Clippers.
Figured out the mute button. Um, I mean, look, for my Clippers people, like, I know I've been asked about it multiple times. I just don't see the Clippers putting together a package for Kuminga. I mean, again, maybe they're a team that swoops in at the last minute, tries to buy low on him, but I just don't see that happening right now. I think the Clippers' main focus as of right now is trying to unload Chris Paul and be able to open up that roster spot and some financial flexibility to sign Kobe Sanders to a standard contract. I know that he's obviously in a two-way, so that game's limit is approaching swiftly with how much they're using him. He had that big game against the Warriors, 22 points as a starter, filling in for James Harden the other day. He's been phenomenal. I know they want to sign into that standard contract, but they can't be under 14 players for more than 2 weeks. And so they're searching the league. They're canvassing the league for a potential suitor for Chris Paul. Unfortunately, it feels like this is going to have to be like a domino situation where once the other dominoes fall in Kuminga and now we've seen Trae Young, we'll see what teams need point guard depth. Maybe the Knicks, maybe the Timberwolves. I know they've been linked to him as well. Maybe those teams end up pursuing him if they strike out on other guys. So right now, that's where the Clippers are looking. I don't really see them going after Kuminga, but like Brett said, you never know. Another team, though, that is seeking moves, the Milwaukee Bucks. We all know, we've heard it for what feels like years now, trying to build around Giannis Antetokounmpo, trying to keep a contender in Milwaukee and have Giannis be satisfied with the team and want to remain in Milwaukee. There was an interview not long ago, I think today or yesterday, about him wanting to remain in Milwaukee and not requesting a trade. I think he's always said the right things publicly, but we all know that what's said publicly isn't always what's said privately. And so the Bucks are looking to make moves, trying to retain Giannis and keep him happy. What are some of the moves they're looking at? I know we've talked about it in the past, Brett, but what are some moves that they're looking at right now, a month away from the deadline?
It was an excellent interview by Sam Amick of The Athletic. Got to give a shout out to my guy Sam, always gracious with his time to talk to us when we're at different NBA events, and just a great guy overall to talk to. And he was able to land this interview that nobody else has been able to get with Giannis Antetokounmpo, and he was real with it. He asked him the questions: Do you want to be in Milwaukee? Do you want to be traded? What does this team need to do? And Giannis was straight up with him. He said that he will not request a trade. He never has, and that he still envisions his future being in Milwaukee till the day he retires. And whether or not people want to believe that or not, I think it's very telling in the manner and the way that he said that. So I suggest everybody goes to The Athletic and read that interview that Sam had. It was fantastic. But as far as the Bucks and what they can do, Trae Young was mentioned for them. I don't really think that was really ever an option. It seemed like that was just Washington or bust for Trae Young. So could they get in the mix for AD now? Because John Horst and his staff are evaluating every team, every single player to see what is available at this trade deadline to get Giannis more help. That is the focus right now. We aren't exaggerating. They even reached out, and as we wrote about yesterday in our column and Intel story on ClutchPoints, they reached out to the Suns about Jalen Green being a potential option, and the Suns were very quick to say that that is not something that they're pursuing. They want Jalen Green back on the floor once he returns from his hamstring injury, and so we're still hearing Jeremy Grant from Portland. We're hearing Zach LaVine from Sacramento. And I'm going to be honest with you, Tomer. I really don't know what the Bucks are going to do right now because they're so limited with assets. They virtually have no trade assets other than that 2031 first round pick that they can offer unprotected. None of their guys are going to bring much value because teams know that Horst and the Bucks are desperate. And there's still teams out there that believe in the back of their minds that Giannis could become available in the summer. So do they really want to help the Bucks knowing that, hey, we may have a shot at one of the best players in NBA history? So there's a lot of teams watching the Bucks closely to see what they're going to do. Could guys like Bobby Portis or Miles Turner, like we mentioned in the Warriors section, could they become available, and will they have a market if their move? Could a third or fourth team become involved in the trade with the Milwaukee Bucks? That's what we're looking at right now. But other than Jeremy Grant and Zach LaVine, it's really kind of, they're keeping their cards close, but they are reaching out to a lot of teams and a lot of players that many didn't expect could potentially be available to see if there's a potential pathway to make a deal.
I will say Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis appear to be their best assets, if any. Miles Turner, I know, coming off that finals run has been phenomenal. It's been really good for them this year, but again, it still feels like they're maybe missing a piece or two. I will say Ryan Rollins has been fantastic for them, a gem of a find, averaging career highs across the board, and in my opinion, the most improved player of the year favorite so far. They're going to have to pay him as well. And so definitely, things that they have to watch around Giannis beyond just his future. I think team building wise, you got to keep that in mind. And is Miles the center of your future? They signed him to that, was it, I believe, 4-year deal. Is he the guy that you want to run with, regardless of whether Giannis stays or not? So I think a lot of things to consider. Not the greatest assets. I know Bobby Portis is obviously like a fan favorite over there. I do wonder what his value on the market is, as well as Kyle Kuzma. Like, could those guys fetch you anything like a Zach LaVine or a Jeremy Grant in deals?
If that 2031 pick is attached, I think that obviously any deal is more lucrative from the Bucks perspective simply because no one knows what they're going to look like in 2031. They could wind up being a bottom 5, bottom 6 team, and if that pick's unprotected, all of a sudden a team that gets that could wind up with the first pick in a draft where we're talking about guys that are middle school or even elementary school right now, that way down the line. So a lot to kind of dissect from the Bucks' point of view. I do expect them making some sort of move involving Kyle Kuzma, maybe even Bobby Portis, but they need to get Giannis some help. It's the worst kept secret around the league that he wants to win right now, and that the Bucks desperately need to do something. So we'll wait and see what happens there.
Another thing really limiting them is that Damian Lillard buyout that they negotiated, $54 million on the books this year. They just don't have many options until that comes off their books. I believe the fall next season. So I think next season will be a lot easier for them. But right now, it's just they're very limited.
Well, his
Um,
contract was waived and stretched. So you got 3, 4 years that you're paying him. I believe it's like 14, $15 million. And right there, that's your mid level exception. So you're
yeah,
getting rid of a good player that you could have on the books right now because of the mistake that you made with Damian Lillard.
yeah, that one did not pay off for them at all. Um, Last one we want to talk about, and it's a two-parter. Two guys that have been mentioned, I think, highly sought after. At least Michael Porter Jr. is with the Brooklyn Nets. He's had a pretty good year for Milwaukee for the Brooklyn Nets this year. Could we see Michael Porter Jr. traded? You mentioned the Warriors interested in him, but it also feels like the Nets are satisfied with kind of their young team around MPJ right now.
So we got Michael Porter Jr., Domantas Sabonis in this final section. We'll start with the Nets' perspective with Michael Porter Jr. There's certainly a market for him as one of the best wing scorers available right now. But as you said, the Nets are not actively looking to move him. It's not like that they're going to every team and saying, what's your best offer for him? And then they're just going to take that before the deadline. They're being selective. They're always willing to listen. But there's just really no indications right now that they're eager to move off of him. That he's had a career year there. They like his production and they believe that he can be what Trae Young is going to be for the Wizards, where he's a veteran player. He's won a championship before. He can help guide this rebuild and guide the young guys on this roster, at least as of right now. That's the indications from Brooklyn. A lot can change between the next 3-4 weeks, and maybe he is on the move. But some of those teams that have been rumored to go after him, one of is Detroit. I haven't heard anything suggesting that Detroit is looking to move Tobias Harris, but you never know. Obviously, if they're not moving Tobias, there's no Michael Porter Jr. there. The Warriors have discussed internally, the Bucks have as well, but neither team has discussed what a deal would potentially look like with the Nets yet. Still a lot of time for that to be sorted out. But I don't think that they're going to be able to really make a market for Michael Porter Jr. It's just more of what teams are interested right now, and is there a deal that makes the most sense for the Nets? So one team that I keep hearing that comes up, Tomer, is the Clippers, and I know you talked about them before of different directions that they could go. Could you see them potentially leveraging some of those guys in the final year of their contract for Michael Porter Jr.? Because it seems like that Steve Ballmer and Lawrence Frank, they still want to make an all-in move, kind of like a situation that the Bucks are in right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a history there between Michael Porter Jr. and the Clippers. I know their doctors were the ones who wrote that they would never draft him and that he probably won't have a very long NBA career, and so he's taking that personally. I believe he talked about it during a playoff series a couple years ago, or before a regular season game. He mentioned that that was something that's motivated him, and so consider the back injuries and the surgeries that he's had. He probably shouldn't have had this long of a career as he had. So the fact that he has been miraculous and obviously great for him. I don't know if I could see that and happening. I think the Clippers were pretty adamant about his back injuries, and um, I still think they want to maintain as much flexibility as possible for both this upcoming offseason and the offseason of 2027. We don't normally see like the free agency classes have not been great. The ones that are coming up are not great, and so I think more than anything, you want to maintain flexibility for that potentially disgruntled star who requests this trade. You want to be ready with your draft assets, with the tradable contracts that they have in Bogdan Bogdanovic, John Collins, Derek Jones Jr. Not saying those guys are going to be involved, but you want to have those 10, 15, $20 million players available to trade, plus any potential picks as well if you want to transition out of the, Kawhi Leonard, James Harden era. So, could it happen? I'm not going to rule anything out in today's NBA. We saw Luka Doncic traded, so I'm not ruling anything out. But I think the Clippers do want to maintain as much flexibility for that next superstar, megastar that requests a trade mid-season, and just be able to pounce on that whenever the chance presents itself.
And that's why the Clippers are targeting guys that are either in the final year of their contract or have just one more year next season using the contracts of maybe Bogdanovich, Chris Paul, Kobe Brown. Some of the guys that we mentioned in our intel story yesterday, you got Colin Sexton, who has long been a target of the Los Angeles Clippers. You got Kobe White of the Chicago Bulls, Anthony Simons, even though his price point and his salary is probably a little bit out of their ability to pay for. But that's kind of what the Clippers are looking at right now for moves that they could make kind of around the edges to improve their outlook right now. We'll move on, Tomer, to the Toronto Raptors and Domantas Sabonis. We wrote about it as well in our intel story. If you missed that yesterday on Clutch Points, be sure to go back and look at it. It's full of plenty of stuff to talk about, from the Trae Young developments to Sabonis possibly being an option for the Raptors, which leads us into our final topic of the day. The Raptors are the one team that keeps coming up in conversations that I have around the league time and time again about them just searching for something. And that's kind of what we heard last year before they traded for Brandon Ingram, is that they wanted to make a substantial upgrade. And we were just asking ourselves, well, why? This is a rebuilding team. Why would they try to escalate things? They went out and got Brandon Ingram. He's fit in perfectly with what Toronto has done this year. And we're still hearing the same thing, that they want to make a substantial upgrade. And Anthony Davis and Domantas Sabonis are absolutely two players that continue to be mentioned for the Toronto Raptors in their front court. The interesting thing about Sabonis, and why I'm kind of raising an eyebrow about people keep bringing up his name, is that he can play alongside another center like Jakob Poeltl, And the Raptors have ties to the Kings. They've had previous interest in Malik Monk, as we've reported here at Clutch Points. Scott Perry, who is the GM for the Kings, drafted both RJ Barrett and Emmanuel quickly when they were with the New York Knicks. So we'll kind of leave this up to everybody right now. Is this something? Is it nothing? It's going to be interesting, Tomer, to see what the Raptors do, because it seems like Bobby Webster sees an opportunity to keep Toronto inside the top four of the East right now and to continue developing their core at the same time. So maybe there's something there. One other name that I've heard in connection to Toronto recently is Trey Murphy. I doubt that they would pay the price that the Pelicans are putting on him right now, but that goes to show you that Toronto's operating as serious buyers right now before the trade deadline, and they're seeing what avenues there are to upgrade their roster in live time.
I will say Toronto, 23-15, just a game and a half back at the second seed in the Eastern Conference. Fair to say they've been a surprise to most around the league this year at how well they've played. They got off to a hot start and have kind of maintained that, even though they've had a couple losses here and there. They're at the top of the East right now. Clearly felt like they, were a good team coming into this, were Brandon Ingram away. Now, whatever move they do make, it has to be that missing piece, because you're not going to trade for Domantas Sabonis or someone else if you feel like there's something else you want. You're paying the price for Trey Murphy or Domantas Sabonis. You better be that missing piece away. So I am curious to see if they feel like those guys are it. I think Sabonis has his, positives and negatives on both ends of the floor, and I think we've seen that a little bit with the Sacramento Kings. But again, Toronto, a team that feels like they're a piece away from serious Eastern Conference contention. But like you said, I'm curious what they think that piece is. Whether it's a wing who can, 3-and-D wing, maybe it's a big man who can facilitate, play alongside Jakob Poeltl, who's been good for them when available, just hasn't been available as much this year. Toronto, I think, might be a sleeper at this deadline.
It's going to be a very interesting deadline, Tomer, because we're going to see lots of multi-team trades. Guys trying to get under the tax line, teams avoiding their hard caps at the first and second apron. We're going to see multiple three-team. We're going to see some four-team trades. Maybe we'll even see something like the Jimmy Butler trade last year where it involved 5 or 6 teams. But there's going to be a lot of moving parts. There's still a lot to sort through over these next 4 weeks, and it's going to be a long 4 weeks of rumors. Things are going to constantly change around the league. Teams and players that were available then may not be available 4 weeks from now, and vice versa. Players that are not available now could wind up being traded. So it's going to be very interesting to monitor.
That wraps it up for Clutch Scoops. Thank you guys. I'm Tomer Azarly. That's Brett Siegel. Appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, we'll have stuff throughout the week. And we're going again live next week on the 15th, the day that the restriction lifts. We are going to be talking about it. So make sure you tune in and follow us. Have a good one, guys. Thank you.